Well, okay, it looks like we have quite a number of people with us, with more coming in, I'm sure, but we might as well get started. Glad to see so many friends here and even a family member. Hello, Marcia. Hello, everybody. I'm Susan Thornton. I'm the chair of Immigrant Pathways Colorado, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here tonight for this special seminar with noted Colorado author, Helen Thorpe. As many of you know, Immigrant Pathways Colorado is a community-supported nonprofit that makes small self-development grants to hardworking immigrants who are in the country legally and are very low income. Our grants are for things like learning English, applying for citizenship, getting education so you can be a technician for medical or dental offices, getting a commercial driver's license, whatever is going to raise the family's standard of living and help them feel more part of the community. So we depend on donors like you to help people from around the world who want to build a better life for their families. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our two co-hosts for tonight. The first is Carrie Warren Gully. Carrie is a member of Immigrant Pathways Board of Directors. She's a member of the Board of Education for Littleton Public Schools, and she's running for office to be a Arapahoe County Commissioner. Our second co-host is Julia Guzman, a talented immigration attorney, and she's also on Immigrant Pathways Board of Directors. So ladies, take it away.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody. As Susan said, my name's Carrie, and it's such an honor to have you all here, and it's an honor to serve on the board for Immigrant Pathways Colorado. We're so excited for the conversation that we're going to have this evening, and I want to start off by letting you all know that we are going to have time towards the end for questions if you have any. We probably, as I said, will be waiting for our questions until the end just to see if Ms. Thorpe answers questions as we go along. So I do want to do just a quick introduction of Helen and thank her for being here this evening. Helen Thorpe, as Susan said, is a wonderful Colorado author here, and she began her career as a journalist and now is the author of 4 books. She was born in London to Irish parents and has grown up here in the United States. So during her journalism career, she has worked for several different organizations. One, the New York Observer. Then she moved into Talk of the Town section at the New Yorker, and later was part of the Texas Monthly. She's also done some freelance stories for different groups such as BuzzFeed, the New York Times Magazine, Slate, Westward, and 5280, which of course is where we've seen a lot of her work because those are local organizations. So she has written 4 books, Just Like Us, Soldier Girls, The Newcomers, and her most recent one, Finding Motherland. And I'm really looking forward to the conversation that we're going to be having with Helen. So welcome, Helen.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Thank you. So I thought maybe what we could do is start off by you talking a little bit about how you started in writing through your journalism.
Sure, absolutely. And thank you so much for asking me to join you this evening. I love the work that this group is doing, and I'm really honored to be with you. I kind of learned the ropes as a journalist many moons ago when I started out in New York City at the New York Observer, and I was trained by daily journalists, even though I was writing for a weekly newspaper. And later I went into magazine writing because I liked writing longer feature stories. And after writing Talk of the Town stories for a little while, I had the chance to go to Texas and write longer feature stories for Texas Monthly magazine. And that's when I began writing about the US-Mexico border and recent immigrants to this country. And then I pursued that later in my book writing at greater length.
Well, thank you. I think it's really interesting, and that is a good segue for us to learn a little bit more about what inspired you to start writing about this subject. It's as we all know, a historic subject. It's broad, it's wide, and it's deep. What kind of inspired you to start this work as you in your writing?
Yeah. Well, absolutely. The answer is my parents. So my mother grew up in rural Ireland on a small family-owned dairy farm. It's still in our family. My cousin runs it today. When my mother was growing up there, they had about 24 cows that they were milking, and today it's 4 times as many. But she's one of 10 children born on that farm, and I have a very big Irish family as a result. I have 52 first cousins. My dad is one of 5 children, and he grew up in Dublin. And they both chose to immigrate 2 times, first to England, where they met and married and had me, and then they immigrated to this country. And Ireland in the 1950s was economically depressed, and they left for economic reasons. But by that point, Ireland had become a country where many people were educated and were literate, and they were able to do the kind of work that was more white collar. So my mom trained as a nurse and my dad as an engineer. But I just, given the history of Irish immigration to this country, you know, many people arrived 150 years ago without the benefit of education, really from a very poor rural background in Ireland during a famine. And so I guess being mindful of that, I just was really interested in recent waves of immigration, how we're treating people, what kind of reception people have here, and the whole question of who gets to belong in American society and how can we be more open and more equitable.
That's really interesting. And I think I remember hearing you talk a little bit about an experience of going to New York City to the Tenement Museum.
Oh yeah.
My sister and I last spring did that, and we both have Irish backgrounds as well. And it was absolutely fascinating to visit the museum and see the conditions that they were living in. Did you experience that as well at the Tenement Museum?
Yeah, so one of the essays in the recent collection is really around understanding the history of Irish American immigration, because I think we have a tendency to think that people from Europe all arrived here relatively well off, and it's just not true. I mean, the big waves of immigration to this country have generally always been people who were in a pretty desperate situation and kind of forced for economic reasons to leave their home countries. So trying to understand that wave of immigration, my mom and I went together to the Tenement Museum, which is such a fabulous institution. And it was there in their library. They had collected some letters written by Irish who immigrated during the potato famines in the 1850s, 1840s and late 1840s and early 1850s. And that was just a really incredibly dire situation. It was the worst disaster in European history other than the Holocaust in terms of deadliness, number of people who died. And we've kind of forgotten a lot about that history and just how desperate, how poor, how hungry the Irish were when they came in that period of time. That's not in my lifetime. My family situation was really different, and I didn't have that level of struggle in my life. But I think, you know, trying to remember that history, trying to connect with it, it's easy for me to extrapolate to the experiences of other people arriving today.
Yeah. Well, it leads me to ask the question about, you know, as you said, you started in journalism, New York to Texas. That should have been a real cultural experience and change. And talking a little bit, as you said, about this transition of yours into liking to write longer things and explore things more deeply. Your first book, Just Like Us, is about 4 young Mexican women coming of age in the United States. And you shared with me, as you and I had a conversation the other day, that this book took you 6 years, I think, to write. I would love to hear a little more about that and why it took you so long and kind of how you started making some of those connections.
Sure. Well, I became really interested in the situation of undocumented youth, undocumented students. While I was living here in Denver, we had so many recent immigrants coming to our state. There was a long history of immigration here and many decades of people coming to work in the fields. But the immigration accelerated at a certain point in time, and we had just large numbers of people coming all at one time. And we had many young people who were born in Mexico, and then their parents brought them here, and their siblings were born in this country. And I had been born in England, and then my siblings were born here. So I had that kind of mixed status family where I had a green card, but my siblings had US citizenship. And the young people that I reached out to that I was getting to know had no legal status in this country, but their siblings were full citizens. And just, I guess, hearing them talk about the inequities within their own households between themselves and their brothers and sisters, and then the inequities they faced at school between themselves and their good friends who maybe had the fortune to be born here or legalized in some way, were really poignant for me. And I really wanted to do whatever I could to help share their stories. And the young women that I got to know were already activists and were really interested in taking advantage of a journalist like me showing up and wanting to share a microphone with them and letting them use pseudonyms, protect their identity, and yet share their stories, which they really wanted to do. And I learned a lot in the process that I didn't know about what the undocumented experience was like and what their families had been living through. And I really wanted to be as faithful as I could to tell their story authentically. But that's not my story, and I didn't live that experience. So I did take 6 years to make sure I felt that I understood their stories sufficiently. And at the end, I shared my manuscript with them before publication to see if they agreed, and they felt that the story was being told in the right way. And we had a good back and forth. But I think in the moment when we began the work, there was no Dreamer movement yet. And they were part of that Dreamer movement, and they were part of wanting to share their stories so that more people could understand. And I think they're part of the reason that DACA got passed, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, which grants them a form of quasi-legality. It's not enough. We need more. But and I was just really honored to get to know them. They're amazing young people. Today they're in their 30s because some time has passed, so it's hard for me to even admit. But yeah.
I was going to say, are you still connected to them? And it sounds like you are.
Yes, we communicate by email and by Facebook, and we get together when we can. We haven't gotten together during the pandemic, so it's been a little while now, but they're very active, and I think they're trying to register people to vote as well as doing their day jobs right now. Like I said, they've been activists for a long time, and it was wonderful to see them, even at a young age, have that kind of agency and try to help the laws change so that everyone in their predicament could have a better experience.
Right. Well, I think it's really such an interesting transition to be talking about these amazing young women and the experiences they had. And we now have, I'd like to kind of move forward to another book of yours called The Newcomers. And I think you kind of built off some of the relationships that you had from your first book in order to look at this situation, which is different and unique from the women that you talked about before, and maybe talk a little bit about what's changed. As you said, these the women that you worked on with Just Like Us, they're in their mid-30s, and now you're going back and working with high schoolers.
Yeah.
would that be, you know, 10, 12 years later?
Yeah. So with the 4 young women, and just like us, 2 of whom were undocumented, the real question hanging over them was how could they fully integrate into American society? And all 4 young women came from families where their parents were from Mexico and they identified as Mexican, but they were really growing up here, and in many ways they were fully American, except not always legally. And so the struggle for the 2 without documents was how to gain legal status and how to be afforded a full position in American society. So with the newcomers, as you're saying, it was really a different situation. I had become really curious about and interested in the journeys of refugee families. It was 2015, and our newspapers were filled with stories about how the numbers of refugees had grown to the highest proportion of the global society since World War II, the epic refugee displacement after World War II, during and after. So we had suddenly seen a great increase due to the conflicts in the Middle East and some of the even longer running conflicts in Africa and Southeast Asia. We had seen just collectively, globally, a real uptick in numbers of refugee families. And for kids, for young people, the great catastrophe is if your family is displaced and you wind up maybe in a camp setting or on the move, you often miss out on schooling. And so an entire generation of young people in the refugee situation were not able to go to school continuously. And I wanted to write about that in some way. So I wound up at South High School, which was the right place to go because they were educating the bulk of the city's teenage refugees. And the principal there had read the first book, just like us. So when I showed up saying, what can you tell me about refugee families? What do you think I should focus on? Is there any story I could tell that would be helpful? She said, come on in, let me show you what we're doing here at South. And so I didn't actually think to ask to kind of be embedded at South or, you know, be immersed there. But the principal had the wisdom to know that I would find the student stories fascinating and that the students themselves would have so much to share that would be really illuminating and really interesting. So she invited me into the newcomer room, which is where the newly arrived refugee students were taking a basic beginner English language acquisition instruction. And the amazing thing about that classroom is the kids were so intelligent, so resourceful, so adaptable, and yet they couldn't talk to one another. They generally didn't have a shared language, and they couldn't really communicate with me, nor very easily with their teacher. And so just watching, what do you do? I mean, how do you give English language instruction if you can't even say, take out your pen, get out your book at the outset? And watching how resourceful the teacher was and how you teach English in that situation. There's a lot of, you know, visual cues, sign language. The teacher was using every means he had available to make the English he was speaking comprehensible to his students, and watching them like sponges just absorb so much English so quickly. One of those students was so proficient by the end of that year that he was nominated to serve on the student council the following year. And he jumped over some levels of English language acquisition into a much higher level. And today he's a star student at the University of Denver, where he's getting straight A's and again serving in student government. So the kids are capable of just incredible things if given the opportunity. And I was trying to show that in a moment when politically we were seeing a lot of anti-refugee, anti-immigrant rhetoric. So I was trying to push back on the moment by sharing really optimistic and inspiring stories of what these students are capable of.
Well, I think that's such a important story to tell, because not only is it a story about the students, it's a story about their family. You know, I know that so many people that are on this call are involved in education at some level and in some way. And it is kind of how our education system has to adapt to new and interesting things that are happening in our arena. And I know that at South High School, they not only had classes for their students, but they also were involving their families and helping them become a part of, understand cultural cues and all of those things that, as you said, if this is your world as a refugee, you are coming in not only lacking some of the language skills, but just cultural skills and everything like that, that are just a whole nother layer of learning.
And it goes two ways. So a refugee family newly arrived may not be that familiar with American culture, but conversely, I, as a journalist, wasn't that familiar with Middle Eastern culture when I was visiting the Iraqi family at home, who were displaced after their father had worked with our military. And I wasn't that familiar with Congolese culture when I was visiting a Congolese family at home. And it's really a wonderful exchange that happens. And what I loved about the administration itself was that over the years, they had acquired a real attitude about how the benefit of having multiple cultures under one school roof, and how everyone gets to become a bigger person, a better person, more knowledgeable about the globe as a whole. And they were really utilizing everyone in the building to enable the entire student body to have a much more sophisticated understanding of all the different cultures in the world. I love seeing that happen.
Yes, very well said. Very well said. Well, I am very excited to talk about your next project because you and I actually got to partner on this project.
I loved, thank you.
We were very honored to have Helen record her book at our business at Books to Life and get to work with our team that works on recordings of audiobooks. So we were so excited to have you come and partner with us, Helen. And what I found so lovely about this project was what motivated you. You and I found each other through a mutual friend. And this was a project that started, well, I'm sure it started well before this, but the idea of recording this started after COVID hit, and we were all feeling very isolated and we weren't going out to stores and that type of thing. So I love your thoughts around why you wanted to do this and kind of how you wanted to support local businesses. So
yeah,
I'd love for you to share that with the group if you would, Helen.
Sure. So during the start of the pandemic, when we were really in shutdown mode and all at home, I was finalizing an essay collection that I'd hoped to publish for a long time. And at the same moment, local independent bookstores were really getting hard hit by the pandemic, as every small business was that was forced to shut down. And for the bookstores, there was a twofold predicament. One was they couldn't easily open up to customers, and even now they have to do curbside pickup and all sorts of things to help keep things safe. But at the same time, book publishers kind of turned the spigot off, so their pipeline of products that they normally sell was also greatly curtailed. So even if you were shopping on their websites, they didn't have as many new books to sell all of a sudden. So I decided to go ahead and try to publish my essay collection in that moment in time in a digital format where it would benefit independent bookstores. And so I talked to some bookstore owners about what formats would be good. And they steered me to Libro.fm, which is an audiobook seller where they have a page where you can choose what independent bookstore should benefit from your purchase. And that was the primary way that independent bookstores were benefiting from digital sales, digital audiobooks. And they also told me about Kobo, which is an alternative to Kindle. So you can buy an ebook through a bookstore and have it benefit the bookstore if you buy an ebook through Kobo. So I decided to put my book out in those two ways. And so I needed to record an audiobook, wanted to record an audiobook. And I also thought that in this moment in time, you know, getting to listen to an author read a book is a kind of warm, intimate experience. But I didn't have any, I'd never recorded before. So Carrie and her team were amazing to work with because they had so much expertise doing books for the Library of Congress and other places. So her engineers were so professional that I wouldn't even realize that I'd made a mistake, but they were carefully reading along with my text, and they would say, oh, no, you said the wrong word, or you garbled that, let's do that over. And they would, you know, seamlessly edit a new take back in, and they were just so good. The quality of the audio is so great. And, you know, and in the studio there, they have a perfectly silent room, so you don't hear my dishwasher come on or my dog bark or, you know, whatever interruptions. So thank you, Carrie, for the amazing experience recording the audiobook.
Of course, I have to admit, Helen, we're always a little hesitant when an author says they want to read their own book, because we just really have no idea how used they are. You know, I think a lot of people think that it's like sitting down and reading a book to your grandchild. And as you know, Helen, it's not. It's very hard work. It's sitting still and being quiet and really focusing for several hours at a time. And we were all thoroughly impressed with your ability to read it well and record it actually as quickly as you did. So it was fun to work together.
Yeah, it was fabulous. And I've gotten just so many wonderful notes from people I went to high school with, my cousins in Ireland, people here in Denver who got to listen to the audiobook and said it meant so much to them to hear my voice if they knew me, or hear it in the author's voice if they were a reader. So
good.
It was a really positive experience for so many people in a time when they kind of needed something to take their mind off the worry and, you know, focus on a story that would transport them.
Yes, well, and to get to support local stores, that's what we all want, and we want to keep that strong. So thank you for that thoughtfulness around that. I thought maybe what we'd do is have you tell us just a little bit about the difference between doing a collection of short stories or essays like you've done in Finding Motherland, and then maybe you have a little bit of a reading that you'd like to share with us.
Yeah. Well, in this collection, I wanted to assemble some things that I had written over the last 25 years that were either more personal in nature about my own family and their journey, or were shorter pieces that were thematically connected. So they're all stories that have to do with migration, family, and food. So my family, my mom's family, everybody's a farmer of some kind. And so later in the collection, I'm not writing about my family anymore, but I'm writing about living here in Colorado and how our peaches are harvested and who comes and does that work. And close-up portraits of some of the men from Honduras and Mexico who come and spend 8 months in our orchards, tending to the trees and harvesting all the fruit. I also included an essay that's never been published anywhere else before, and I'll read to you from that. And it's about a decade-long friendship that I have with a mom that I met at my son's elementary school. And I think I'll read to you from it and then explain a little bit more about the essay. Well, yeah, I'll do that. Okay. Cooking with Rosalind. Rosalind hovered by the principal's office, a plump woman with dyed hair, a color that fell somewhere between eggplant and magenta. She wore a mauve t-shirt that danced with sequins. The meeting for prospective parents had been scheduled for the middle of the day when working parents were working, and she was one of the few Spanish-speaking moms to show up. Her face was clouded with bewilderment. I was new to the school environment myself and had no idea what we were supposed to be doing, but selfishly figured this was a good chance to practice my mediocre Spanish. ¿Hablas español? Sí. The clouds parted, her face lit by internal sunshine. Rosalind launched into a rapid-fire monologue, and I followed maybe 1/3 of its content. We set off in search of a bilingual staff person. Along the way, I learned Rosalind was originally from Acapulco, Mexico. She had 2 grown children who lived in Idaho, which was muy lejos, very far away. Her husband had died in a car accident while she was pregnant with her youngest child, a boy who was about to enter kindergarten, along with my son. She had recently survived a bout with breast cancer. And she made a living selling burritos to Rockies fans outside Coors Field. Rosalind's quick, gritty life sketch stayed with me, and when I saw her again on the playground, I zigzagged over to chat. The elementary school we shared was located on the east side of Denver, close to a huddle of low-rent apartment complexes filled with many immigrant and refugee families. About 3/4 of the school qualified for free and reduced lunch. At drop-off and pick-up, clusters of parents spoke in Amharic, Arabic, Burmese, Spanish, and Swahili. The PTA moms liked to list the countries represented in the building when we pitched the school to new families, but we had a hard time actually talking to one another across our cultural differences. Anglo moms scheduled meetings attended predominantly by other Anglo moms and a few African Americans. The other parents I saw at drop-off and pickup spoke solely to those who shared their home languages, but I figured optimistically that we could all work on that. Rosalind and I fell into chatting before the morning bell. Soon I started calling her my maestra de español, and she called me her English teacher. She corrected my pronunciation assiduously, but I wasn't quite as helpful to her and forgot to say things in English at all until she objected, saying, "I need more Inglés." We were the same age, and we lived only 3 miles apart. Temperamentally, however, we were polar opposites, an important fact that I discovered after we'd grown accustomed to our halting way of communicating and had successfully cobbled together a number of what might generously be called conversations. She was an extrovert with a splashy sense of style who favored swishy bell-bottoms and t-shirts with spangles. She owned a fetching hot pink tracksuit adorned with fuzzy pom-poms. On occasion, she showed up at school wearing flannel pajamas, bedroom slippers, and a winter coat, and laughed about it. I was an introvert with a more sedate wardrobe, lots of navy, brown, and black. One day, she eyed me critically and announced my hair was going gray. Her hairdresser could help, she said. Instead, I bought a pair of purple eyeglasses. "Wow," Rosalind affirmed in Spanish, "you look younger now." In the spring of the kindergarten year, we both chaperoned a trip to the zoo. At one point, I grew exasperated with the 4 active boys I was supervising who kept going off in 4 different directions. Noticing that I was taking my role as a chaperone far too seriously, Rosalind snuck up behind me, clawed at my back, and made ferocious lion noises. I swung around and there she was, laughing her head off. She did the pretend lion thing 6 times until I stopped being so uptight and relaxed into enjoying a sunny day at the zoo. After we exchanged phone numbers, Rosalind started forwarding positivity videos, religious memes, and digital prayers. If I worried about something, she would admonish, "Say, ayúdame Cristo." She said, "No importa," so regularly I came to understand this was not just a phrase, it was a philosophy. And later, a friend of hers taught me the colloquialism, ni modo, which epitomized the Mexican-born mom's stance towards hardship. Literally, the words mean no way, as in no way forward, but the term's typically spoken after an experience that renders one powerless. You say ni modo when you've lost a job and you cannot pay the rent. You say Numoto if your husband dies and leaves you behind as the sole breadwinner. You say Numoto when the doctor finds a lump and says it's breast cancer. A catastrophe has unfolded and you cannot fold it back up, so you accept, accept, accept. Being a single mother without documents in a country that recognizes the accomplishments of immigrant children, but almost never the role of their self-sacrificing parents, that's another situation to make a person say with hard-earned equanimity, Nimoto. So that's the opening of a long essay. That's I don't know, 1/8 of it. And it goes on for another 9 years. And in that time, you see Rosalind start to invite me into her home, and eventually me invite her into mine. And some things happen in her life that causes her quite a lot of hardship. And it's how she overcomes those difficulties and what unbelievable fortitude she has. And I kind of describe her journey through the election of President Trump, which brings about a lot of anxiety for her. And we ultimately see her triumph over that and figure out a way out of her predicament. And we also see her son go from kindergarten all the way through senior year. So it was amazing to get to be friends with her for that time. And I'm really honored that she shared her life with me and was okay with me writing this essay. And I did share it with her in Spanish so she could read it too, but I really appreciated her willingness to share her story. And she asked for a pseudonym, so that's not her real name, but.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. And if you all have not had the opportunity to listen to this most recent collection of stories, I think you'll find it really interesting how Helen has tied all of these stories together. So I just want to, excuse me, I want to let you all know that you can ask questions if you have any of Helen. We are getting close to the end of our time, but if you have any and you want to put them in the chat box down there, that would be wonderful. But I do have just a final question for you. Well, first of all, tell us how we go about getting your books. You mentioned the 2 platforms that you're using for independent bookstores, but tell us a little bit more about how we might get some of your books.
Sure, thank you. My website is just my name, helenthorpe.com, and there's a tab that says Finding Motherland in the menu. And ultimately, you'll see you go to helenthorpe.com/finding-motherland. And all the links are there for how to buy the book. And I try to guide you through how you can buy it in a way that will support independent booksellers. So check out the website and you'll find all the information that you need there. Thanks for asking.
Of course, of course. And also you'll find your other books there as well, because I've been on your website quite a bit to explore. So if it is people are potentially thinking of other questions, I have one last one that I was intrigued by, and that is that the United Nations has been promoting the idea of reading books that are written by and about immigrants and refugees. And really the purpose of that is to, I think, create a little bit of empathy for the situations that some of these families and individuals find themselves in. So I wondered if you might speak to that goal and what your thoughts are around that.
Well, I think, our news cycle has gotten incredibly chaotic and also shorter and shorter in the sense that there's news breaking continuously around the clock now on Twitter and other places. And so we tend to discuss subjects like immigration or refugee resettlement in just tiny little sound bites or tiny little phrases with very little deep understanding unless we work or live in that situation. And so the United Nations, which is really trying to promote greater understanding of why people are displaced from their homes, in general, promoted the idea of reading books written by and about immigrants and refugees as an alternative to this kind of news cycle where our conversation is so shallow. So to get a deeper understanding, if you read novels or narrative nonfiction books that tell the journeys and why people are displaced and what their journeys are like and who they really are, I think in general, you come away with a sense that people making these journeys today are just incredibly heroic and to be admired. And there's so much that we can learn from them, and we can also feel inspired by their capacity to adapt and navigate all kinds of situations and get themselves and their families out of danger into safer places or places where they can more easily thrive. And I, during the work that I was doing, had really tried to privilege reading books written by immigrants as well as about them. And I think you learn so much, especially from some of the firsthand accounts of people with lived experience. So yeah, their reading list is wonderful.
Well, I just want to say thank you so much for your time this evening and your willingness to sit down and have a conversation with us. I hope people do go to your website and learn a little bit more about your books.
Yeah.
I know that we would love feedback from the group if they like this kind of conversation, because there are a lot of Colorado authors out there that have written about their experiences. And if people enjoyed this, we might consider doing it with some other folks as well. So Helen, thank you for a wonderful evening and a wonderful conversation.
Yeah.
And I hope everybody has an opportunity to get to hear or read some of your work. And I'm going to hand it back over to Susan so she can kind of clear us out here, although it does look like there's a few questions. Susan, do you want to ask those?
Yes, I've gotten actually some questions come in by email to me instead of going to the chat box. And one is, what project are you planning next?
I love that question. Well, right now I'm really preoccupied with teaching. So I had an amazing honor and opportunity. I was invited to teach at Princeton University. Originally it was going to be this fall. Now it's going to be the fall of 2021. And so I'm teaching every piece of the course that I will teach at Princeton right now at Lighthouse Writers. And the course is around how do we create empathy through writing. And so I'm looking at books by other people who attempt to create empathy for the people that they're writing about. So one book that I teach in the class is called The Yellow House, and it's by Sarah Broom. And she's African American, and she's writing about the experience of her family living through Hurricane Katrina, and being displaced and being internally displaced within the US and not able to afford to live in New Orleans again after the hurricane. And I think she's trying to create empathy for people who are displaced by natural disasters and people who face structural racism. So I'm looking at books written by and about immigrants in the class, but also the African American experience. So primarily what I'm doing right now is teaching the work of other authors other than myself, and not writing very much. And I miss writing and I can't wait to get back to it, but I don't know what my next writing project will be. I know what my next class at Lighthouse will be. It's called The Creation of Empathy.
Yeah. Well, certainly that all spills over in some of the work we do, and we are doing, looking at structural racism. It's so pervasive, unfortunately, in our society. And so many of our grantees have brown or black faces, as well as the rest of their body, of course. But, you know, so we are seeing the harm that does to people across many bridges and all. And so I'm glad you're doing that. I'm very impressed that you're doing that with Princeton. That's amazing. So wish you lots of luck with that.
Thank you. Thank you for the work that you're doing. And yes, the alignment of if one has Black or brown skin and one is an immigrant, you can get sort of multiple levels of discrimination or prejudice. And I think we see that in our current, policy around where we will accept refugees from. I think we see racism and structural bias around religious, what religion one is as well. And I hope we can evolve as a country, remember our better past, our better selves, and see some change, hopefully in the near future, in a better direction.
Well, I thought this discussion was extremely interesting, and thank you so much, Helen, and Carrie and Julia. Thank you also. If those of you who are still watching found this webinar as interesting as I did, I hope you'll support Helen Thorpe by buying one or more of her books at an independent bookstore with a tattered cover. She mentioned Kobe, which I had not been familiar with, which is Kobe, as I understand it. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Which is a platform for audiobooks. And I hope you will support her. And I hope you also think hard about supporting Immigrant Pathways Colorado, because the work we do, I think, is really important. One-on-one, we're building futures for people. To support Immigrant Pathways Colorado, you can go to our website, which is www.connectingimmigrants.org, and you can click on the Colorado Gives logo, or you can send a check to IPC at Post Office Box 401, Littleton, Colorado 80160. Thank you all for joining us tonight, and stay well. And thank you again, Helen Thorpe.
Thank you.